All right, joining us now for tonight's big close-up is House Oversight Chairman James Comer. Chairman, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time. Looking at this release today and this idea there are going to be more things released along the way, I know you've conducted your own investigation in Congress. Was there anything released that you had already seen, and can you tell us anything about what you think is still to come?
Well, I think that there's been so much written about Epstein over the years. I think a lot of what's released, people say, well, I've seen that or I already knew that, even though they, in fact, are new documents. There are just a lot of documents out there. This is a very high-profile case. This dates back 20-plus years, over 5 previous presidential administrations. So there's going to be a lot of documents, and you can't just upload 1 million pages of documents in one day. Remember, these victims wanted their names redacted, and anything that would pertain to their privacy, they wanted it redacted. So it takes a long time, and several eyes have to gaze over each document to determine whether or not this particular line or that particular line should be redacted. So it's going to take time, but I'm confident the Trump administration is going to do that. They're complying with my subpoena and the request of Congress in that discharge petition to produce the documents, and they're producing the documents.
Chairman Comer, Democrats are obviously throwing a tantrum over many things, but in this specific case over the redactions and the delayed release of some of the documents. Watch this.
It is outrageous that with all the time they had to prepare, they have failed to release the full Epstein files.
The Trump administration continues to stonewall, continues to not provide us full transcripts, and clearly they don't have a real interest in transparency.
They're just simply willfully withholding the materials. I think the Judiciary Committee should do its real oversight.
Chairman Comer, what's your response to all of that?
Well, give me a break. Anytime I see Adam Schiff on there being outraged, it just makes me want to vomit in my mouth. But at the end of the day, where was the Democrat outrage over the 4 years of Merrick Garland being Attorney General and Joe Biden being president? I mean, this information could have been released decades ago. And in fact, I think that when you go back and have to put files together, it's my understanding there wasn't just one file and one filing cabinet dedicated to Epstein. There are lots of different files. There's grand jury testimony. There's transcribed interviews and depositions during the prosecution of both Maxwell and Epstein. And putting all this stuff together, the Democrats complain when we release documents that aren't 100% redacted to their liking. And then they complain when documents are redacted. The Democrats are going to complain over anything because I believe, from what I've seen thus far, the narrative that they've tried to put out to the public along with the liberal media that Donald Trump has a huge amount of liability in this, I just don't think that's there. So the Democrats are going to be outraged. They're going to try to make people not believe what they see with their own eyes. But at the end of the day, I think the solution to all this problem is releasing all the documents. And I think that that's what President Trump's going to do. I strongly encourage him to do that. That's the will of the Congress, and it's the will of the American people. So I think that we'll continue to get documents. I've been assured that from the Department of Justice, and the American people can judge for themselves who the bad guys are in this terrible series of crimes.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I saw some commentary on social media about the tweets from prominent Democrats on this subject dating back to 2020, and then a 4-year hiatus with no tweets about it at all. And then they started up again, which I think sort of speaks to the partisan nature of some of this, at least.
Yep.
I want to talk about the Clintons, specifically the former president, Bill Clinton, our 42nd president. We saw that image of him flashed up earlier during Maddie Rivera's report, him in that hot tub, apparently, potentially with a victim or someone whose face has been blacked out. I know that you are trying to get some answers from President Clinton, and there are depositions scheduled. What's the timetable on that? Do you have any sense that he might cooperate? What do you want to know from the former president?
Well, first of all, I'm not accusing Bill Clinton of any wrongdoing. There was that picture of him in a hot tub with the person's face redacted. The Democrats put pictures of Trump out there, redacted people's faces, wanting people to think that they were Epstein victims when in fact they weren't. They had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. So I don't know who was in the picture with Clinton. There were a lot of pictures with Clinton. But at the end of the day, everyone we've subpoenaed, everyone who I've subpoenaed, Democrat and Republican, have answered our questions. They've worked with us. Donald Trump answers questions every day from a curious media about Jeffrey Epstein and his knowledge of that. Bill Clinton, on the other hand, has never answered any questions. There's no substantive interviews. There are no press conferences where Bill Clinton's ever answering questions. We expect him to come in and answer our questions. If he doesn't answer our questions because of my lawful subpoena, then we're going to hold him in contempt of Congress. And I hope that Pam Bondi will do with that contempt vote what Merrick Garland did with contempts from the Biden investigation. So, look, I think that Bill Clinton should want to answer questions. The history is not going to be very kind to him with respect to Epstein if he doesn't answer questions. And Democrats want to talk about Trump and Clinton. At the end of the day, Donald Trump has answered thousands, maybe tens of thousands of questions about Epstein. I don't know anywhere Bill Clinton has ever answered a question. So we're not trying to come in, bring the former president in and embarrass him. This is a substantive investigation. No one's accusing him of wrongdoing. But he needs to answer questions because Jeffrey Epstein spent a lot of time with Bill Clinton, more time with Bill Clinton than any of the prominent names that we've seen thus far. And yet Bill Clinton hasn't, to this date, answered any questions.
Chairman Comer, Molly Line here. Thank you for joining us. And I have the same frustrations with the black boxes over the faces. I understand why they're there, but I would love further context on all of these photos and particularly on that aspect of them. But I want to turn to another investigation that you're conducting into the historic fraud in Minnesota. Democrats are already dismissing this inquiry. Instead, they're personally attacking you. Watch.
Using Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and AG Keith Ellison of not cooperating with the committee's investigation into some of the widespread fraud happening there with the social services in the state. Do you think they should cooperate with the committee's investigation, and do you have concerns about what's happening in the state?
James Comer is a joke, an embarrassment, an unserious individual, and a malignant clown.
Chairman Comer, I just want to get your response. Can you provide us with any updates on the investigation as well?
That's the third time he's called me a clown. Look, everyone that watches his interviews and sees how he tries to imitate Obama, they wonder why he's got the nickname Dollar Store Obama. Look, he's a low IQ individual who has to resort to name calling. That's what he criticizes Donald Trump over. I don't care what he calls me. He can come to Kentucky and campaign against me. I'll pay for his gas bill. But at the end of the day, to defend Tim Walz is going to be a huge mistake for the Democrats because everyone in Minnesota knows that this fraud has been taking place for a long time. All I'm doing is my job getting the backs of the taxpayers. If Hakeem Jeffries doesn't like it, he can go fly a kite because at the end of the day, the American people expect their tax dollars to be spent wisely. They expect oversight. And the Democrats only provide oversight when it pertains to Donald Trump. I'm providing oversight for the American taxpayers, whether it's Democrat or Republican. It just so happens that Tim Walz is a beloved Democrat from the liberal Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries, and he's going to have to answer questions about the billions, not millions, not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of fraud that we see wasted in Minnesota, and the fact that, according to state whistleblowers, state employees in Minnesota, most of whom are Democrats, they allege that they alerted both Governor Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison about this fraud, and they did nothing about it because they didn't want to offend that massive Somali population that they've moved into Minnesota.
Well, Congressman, listen, you've got an accent similar to mine. I'm sure you got plenty of colloquialisms other than go fly a kite, so I appreciate you keeping it civil here on the big weekend show with us. Yeah. Chairman, thank you for joining us and coming on tonight.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.